episode 13. In today's interview, we have Jessica Alana. Jessica is a health coach, a scientific researcher, an author, a keynote speaker, and she has a degree in biomedicine. In today, we discuss the link with mold illness, which is the field that she really specializes in now. In this interview, we go into what to look for, the symptoms, how to overcome any type of mold illness, and much more. So I hope you enjoy. As always, please like, share, and subscribe, and press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any of our new interviews.
So, Jessica, how did you originally find out about mold illness, and what made you kind of choose that as a specialty or as a profession?
Yeah, so when I first started my practice, for some reason, I think it must be fate, I kept on attracting moldy clients. So all of my clients, if we ran an organic acid, it would always come back for mold. And then I actually met a very good friend. He was originally a client. Now he's become a kind of mix between a friend and a very good client. And he was, ex mold for about 5 years. And he's currently still recovering from all of the inflammation caused by mold. And he told me, like, yeah, it's a huge, huge issue. And it's 1 in 5 people. And we can go into that later because 1 in 5 have the DNA, right? They
Yeah.
have the HLA genetic predisposition. So once I started figuring out that this is a huge problem that I can solve for the general public, and I figured out how important this is and how many misdiagnoses are walking around, I knew that it was what I wanted to specialize in.
Wow. So it wasn't something that you actually sort of looked to get into originally. It almost found you.
So I had been, yeah, I'd been in the regenerative medicine space and the kind of biotech space, biomedicine space. And I've even spoken at a lot of public summits, and no one was really talking about mold. So even prior to all my knowledge, I'd never really heard of mold being a big issue. And
Yeah.
then when I finally opened that can of worms, I was shocked.
Wow. So you mentioned that a lot of your patients were testing positive. What sort of symptoms were you seeing? And was there a pattern that started to get you sort of looking deeper into it?
So in mold, it's actually classified as chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So if you look at the 35 peer-reviewed papers, this is what mold illness or sick building syndrome, this is what the layman terms are actually described as in the papers. And there's actually a whole list of symptoms. And what classifies mold or SIRS, which is obviously, C and IRS for chronic inflammatory response syndrome, is that it's a multi-system symptom. So you have symptoms in almost every system of the body. And there's a questionnaire that you can take online, and it will ask you about the 35 symptoms that you can experience, and it will tell you the probability that you have mold illness.
Wow. And is this people that when you've tested them, they would clearly identify where the mold was? Would they say, "Oh, I did live in a place that had mold," or sometimes is it people that would just have no idea?
So yeah, in the beginning, a lot of my clients, they never really registered that when they began to live in a certain building at a certain time point in their life, they got sick, right? And
Yeah.
that's kind of my responsibility to help them identify that. So most of the time, if someone comes to me and we run a mycotoxin panel and it comes back positive, I actually have to track back as to when they started to feel sick, because for some people, it can actually be when they were 7 years old or when they were 20 years old and they lived in a moldy dorm room. So the history when it comes to mold illness is incredibly important.
Wow. Yeah. With the symptoms, obviously, you've mentioned that. I mean, is it, they call it the great mimicker, right? So I'd imagine it can kick up any sort of issue. What was like the main sort of familiar things that you would see? And, before you even do a test, you're thinking, okay, I think you're, probably going to go down this route.
So one of the main patterns I see is gut issues that are totally treatment resistant. So, someone who's had IBD or IBS, whatever you'd like to call it, for
Yeah.
20 years. Um, Possibly someone who's had brain fog, chronic fatigue for multiple years, and it's just absolutely treatment resistant. They've tried every supplement, maybe even psychedelics, and nothing really seems to work. This
Yeah.
is when normally the alarm bells start to ring and you begin to think it's mold, because no one actually thinks that mold can do this to you, especially in the EU and the UK.
Yeah. These seem, I mean, what you're mentioning are sort of more like long-term chronic issues. Do you see things like, yeah, because in my research, what I was looking into, things like vertigo, or even like ringing in the ear, or any, even things like infertility and things like this. Have you seen cases like, I know it's a bit of a wide range there, but have you seen sort of random things like that as well along the way?
Yeah, so actually, in my male patient population, I see a lot of sensory issues when it comes to sexual function.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then also, like you said, ringing in the ears, also a metallic taste in the mouth is
Yeah.
pretty strange. Also, a lot of people tend to have really chronic cytomegalovirus or Epstein-Barr virus, and it's because of the dampened immune system due to mold. So mold, yeah, it's tricky. Like people tend to not just have mold. It's like they have mold, but they have 20 other diseases and conditions under the surface too.
Wow. I had a recent experience. It was a family member who years ago they lived somewhere that had mold, and it was quite bad. They were cleaning it up and it was just back within, a short period of time. And they had an issue with their lungs. It was never really kind of looked at, but took antibiotics or whatever. And then the next year, chest infection that got worse. And then this year, chest infection that turned into pneumonia. And him being a man, he's like, oh, I'll be fine. And ended up having to call an ambulance to go to the A&E, and half of his lungs basically collapsed. And they've done loads of tests, and it's just riddled with black mold.
Wow, and this all began 2 years ago, did you say?
3 years ago.
Yeah, I've had a similar case actually of a gentleman and his family, they won't mind me saying because I asked for permission, but he actually passed away.
Oh my God. What, due
Yeah,
to lung problem, pneumonia, or?
he had consistent lung issues and a lot of other issues, and there was mold in his flat. And they started the connection between mold and his issues a little bit too late, you could
Wow.
say. And that's what his family said as well, that, they left it too late. And then we did manage to run a mycotoxin panel on the gentleman before he passed away. But yes, he sadly, God rest his soul, he'd passed away.
Wow. So was that like long-term exposure then over years, or?
It was long-term exposure over years, and then I think a bit of lifestyle as well, and some other complexities involved. But I think, yeah, mold was really a driver in that disease complication.
Oh my God. And the thing is, I mean, not many people, it's becoming more of a spoken about topic, especially, people like yourself and others who are talking in great detail about it. But it's something that not a lot of people think about, but nearly everyone has experienced mold to some degree. And you normally hear, I just put a bit of bleach on it, wiped it away, and that was the end of it. But they don't really know the kind of ins and outs of what you know, what can happen from there. It's not a case of, I just wipe it and see you later, it's done. It does kind of, you know, the mold spores and the microtoxins, and once it's in the body, it can stay in the body, right?
Yeah, so by the way, for anyone listening, please do not use bleach because you're actually going to cause the mold to grow. So mold can multiply in bleach. It doesn't kill the mold by any shape or form. And you're also going to cause more volatile organic compounds too in your environment. So you really don't want to use bleach. And regarding the detoxification of mold, so we touched on this subject previously, but basically there's around 22 to 25% of the general population. And these guys, unfortunately, have a genetic predisposition in the human leukocyte antigen gene. And when you have this genetic predisposition in the HLA gene, your innate immune system doesn't turn off in the presence of mycotoxins, which are mold toxins. So inherently, you are unable to detoxify from the mold toxins. And then the fact that your immune system is just so turned on, you become constantly stuck in inflammation.
So if somebody had this gene and they worked with someone like yourself, I would imagine, but we're talking like chelators and different amino acids and, you know, all of this that would help to kill and kick out the mold. If they're unable to detox it, would you go quite heavy on binders? Like, is there a solution here, or is it a bit of a dire situation?
So essentially, there is the clinical standard of a mold protocol, and this was developed by Dr. Shoemaker. So I have a lot of respect for Dr. Shoemaker. I trained under him, and he discovered mold illness in 1998. And he managed to put all of the dots together. I think he's a genius. And inherently, if you follow his protocol, it is relatively cookie cutter to some degree, but it has to be the backbone of any mold protocol. So for myself, I like to integrate peptides and other supplements and some other binders and even some other biohacking technology. But I always make sure to include his backbone. And I think that's really important for people to know that there is a clinical standard when it comes to mold.
Perfect. Okay. So it is good news. We can all fix ourselves if we do have any kind of issue. And I guess that kind of answers the question. If there's 5 people in a house and only one has, you know, a chronic illness, the chances are that they're the one who
Has the
has.
HLA.
And would
Yeah.
you say everyone else generally is fine, or there's varying degrees of how unwell they could be?
I would say it's a spectrum. So, inherently, if the house that they're living in is ridiculously moldy, it has the possibility to make everybody sick. But if we're speaking about a normal circumstance where there's a family of 5 and only one person has the HLA, it can kind of creep up slowly. So the one individual can just become sicker and sicker, and it can be pretty strange. And then the other members of the family, they may have acute brain fog or some short-term acute sinus issues and maybe some loose stools and things like that, but they're not really going to have the full-blown inflammatory impact. And there is a movie called Moldy Movie, and it's spelled like the Americans spell it, so moldy.com, so moldymovie.com. And
Is that
in this
Dave Asprey?
movie,
Was it Dave Asprey?
yeah, so it's Dave Asprey and Dr. Shoemaker.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And here you can actually, witness first account testimonials from people who had families where no one believed that they were sick.
And you might even find that people living under the same roof, as you said, they might have some sort of a, you know, situation to a lesser degree and not even know. Like, brain fog's quite a common thing, right? So if you're at a lesser degree, you wouldn't ask any questions, would you? You just carry on and say, oh, it's just the way my brain is.
I mean, people tend to normalize their very slight and common illnesses. So everybody to a certain extent normalizes brain fog, emotional dysregulation, depression, anxiety, perhaps even gut issues, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think there's so many different views and opinions and, reasons or excuses, I guess, for a lot of these, common things. So you could spend your whole life with gut issues and brain fog and never even consider the possibility that you lived in a moldy house 10 years ago. And like you say, sometimes it could be so long ago, you just wouldn't know, would you?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at the statistics, around 85% of the Northern American population is metabolically inflexible. And then if you extrapolate that onto how many of those would have gut issues and brain fog because they are metabolically inflexible, and then when you combine that with like environmental toxins, you have so many people walking around not living to their true potential.
Wow. Yeah, I've spoke about it publicly before, and I went down some right old rabbit holes because years ago, I basically had a vaccine. It was a typhoid vaccine to travel to India. And as soon as I had that, I ended up with vertigo. This is why I mentioned vertigo earlier. And I thought, wow, I I was never like anti-vaccine at all. I've always been a bit skeptical and questioned, do I need it? But I thought, I'm going to India. I've never been before. I'd rather just be safe. I definitely hold different views now. But anyway, so I ended up getting vertigo from that. And I called the GP and told them, and they said, yeah, that is a symptom. So I'm like, you didn't tell me that, before. So anyway, 4 or 5 days, ears ringing, couldn't lift my head up. I mean, it was a nightmare. It was as soon as I lift my head, everything's like wobbling, and it was horrendous. Anyway, I took some medication, and that went. And years later, during the whole COVID situation, I was really stressed by it all because I was worried about lockdowns and, they're going to force vaccinate us, all this kind of stuff. And anyway, I ended up getting the vertigo again, and it was really bad. And I'm just trying to remember the timelines because it was a few years ago. And anyway, that kept happening. And the worry I had from the vertigo, I mean, I was getting really stressed out and worried about it. And I went to an osteopath, and he was saying, oh, I think it's because of your neck positioning because you're working at home now during lockdowns. And so anyway, I started doing all these neck exercises he told me to do. And this is when I really started looking into, health stuff. And anyway, so I started to do all of the exercises, and I ended up with a really bad neck. It was so bad. And I think it was just psychological because this guy's got in my head. It was such a weird experience. So anyway, the neck was a thing. And then I started to get really lightheaded, and I was getting like blood sugar fluctuations. Like if I didn't eat breakfast by, 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm like lightheaded and weird, and my vision was weird because of the blue light from the computer. And then I got down the whole blue light rabbit hole as well. And then I found that, the vertigo kept coming back again. And then I started to get all tingles down one side of my body. It was
Okay.
like sciatica, basically. So I started to read it up on Dr. John Sarno and the whole thing with, stress and suppressed anger and psychological things that can manifest physical symptoms. And once I started to get into that, a lot of the symptoms started to sort of disappear. And then I realized we had mold in the house.
Ah.
Yeah. And I mean, to this day, I still don't actually know what caused all of that. But I started to look at mold, and I spent a lot of time on that. And it turned out that we had a blocked gutter. And the gutter, basically the water was coming in through the ceiling, and it was stuck in, the what do you call it? The drywall.
That's the worst. Mold loves drywall.
Yeah, it's like paper basically, and it started to spread across both of the the bedrooms at the front of the house, and then a little bit in the loft as well. And that's I started to read up on how to get rid of it, and we had a guy come round, and he's looked at where the source is, and You know, he's like, do you know what? It's not actually that bad, but you need to do something about it, basically. So we did, and we bought a air purifier, and I put off buying a dehumidifier, which we've actually bought recently, which, you know, that's been unbelievable. But I'm now thinking that was a big problem. And I just wanted to say as well, we went down to Cornwall where my partner, her family lived down there, and we rented. Sorry, no, we were house sitting her cousin's house, and
Mm-hmm.
as soon as we went in the house, I started to get all these symptoms back, and I'm thinking this is weird, and I realised that it was a new house. He built the house, and he had loads of mold in the ensuite, right, and it was quite bad as well, and I felt horrendous, lightheaded. My eyes were weird. It's like my vision. It's like, yeah, it's really weird. Loads of anxiety.
Oh
Just
no.
yeah, it was horrible. And the last night we stayed there, I ended up really ill, vomiting, you know, the whole shebang. I don't know what caused it. I've got no idea to this day. She didn't have anything, but I did. And I was up all night, projectile vomit. It was horrendous. And we got back home, and obviously I cleared the house out and stuff a while before that. And it all just disappeared again. It's like,
Okay.
so yeah, what do you think of that long story?
I mean, yeah, it kind of sounds like you've got like a bloodhound nose now for mold, which is kind of good because even if you go to hotel rooms or like different villas, you'll know what's making you sick.
Yeah. So you've got like a sixth sense.
I'm the same, and a lot of my clients are the same, to be honest.
Really? Do they get the like lightheaded and feels like your blood sugar levels are a bit up and down? Do they get that sort of thing, or is it like headaches or?
So actually, one of the most common acute symptoms is to have a very scratchy throat. Like the
Really?
back of the throat is like scratching.
Oh wow.
That's what I get anyway, like a very scratchy throat
Well, it just sort of comes on when you're in the building.
from an immune response, yeah.
Oh my Lord.
So do
I
you think you have
recently
the HLA gene?
I could get it tested, I guess. I've not
Yeah,
even, yeah, I didn't go down that route. To be honest, the symptoms sort of went, and I've not really had any since.
probably not then. Probably not HLA.
No, I think I might have just had a heavy exposure, and
Yeah,
no,
that's what I thought when you told me.
I did loads of saunas and activated charcoal and DMSO as well, which tends to be pretty good with mold. I mean, I've read a lot on your Twitter that you put out, and it's probably a little bit too technical for me, so I have to sit and really figure that out. But yeah, I noticed that symptoms really did sort of go away. But I went round my partner's mum's house. This is another sort of time that I've noticed, and I'm sat there, and you know, we're there for about an hour, and again I just felt dizzy and weird. And it turns out she had loads of mold in the bathroom, and she was having people to come round to sort of fix it up. So again,
hmm
I've been able to detect it, you know, within a very short period of time. And once we got away from the house, you know, a couple of hours later, I'm fine again. There's definitely some, you know, maybe PTSD from it, and my body just knows not to be in a certain place. Really strange.
I mean, like perhaps the super heavy exposure, which was your first time, it basically gave you the antigens.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
now when your body and your adaptive and innate immune system detect the mold, you release the antigens and your body's like, yeah, you need to leave.
Really, that is so interesting.
It
Wow.
could be, just throwing it out there.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. It's interesting because, like I said, a family member had the chest infection that was, you know, turned to pneumonia. I had a chest infection as well. It was about 6 weeks ago, and you know, got through that. And I've noticed that I'm so mucousy in my throat still 6 weeks later.
No way.
Yeah, and that's got me thinking again. I mean, I know we don't have any exposure in the house now, but it does make me think it could still be in there. And it's like lingering almost. And my body, I'd imagine your body tries to excrete, you know, toxins through mucus anyway.
It
So maybe
does. Yeah, it really does.
Yeah, so when you get to 6, 7 weeks and it's, it's not a cough anymore, but it's like I can feel it in my throat. You know, when you said the scratchy throat?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not sort of quite that obvious, but it's sort of there, and I'm constantly having to clear my throat. And I have been thinking since he's had the whole situation with the mold, because I called it as well. I said, when he said about the lungs, I said, I reckon it was that mold from 3 years ago. And yeah, it turned out it was that. So I've kind of had it on my radar, but yeah, it's crazy how yeah, it's just it can sort of just be there and pop its head every every now and then until you sort of clear it out, I guess.
Yeah, it's a trending topic right now too.
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of the mold that we get in our homes, so obviously you need with like newer homes, they're not as like free flowing with airflow as say the old Victorian types of houses that you get in the UK, maybe are built slightly on the wobble with cracks and air coming in and out. We're like everything's sort of stud walled up and tight, and there's not a lot of flow, and the humidity in this country is quite high during the winter months and the summer. So it's almost like a complete breeding ground. And
Mm-hmm.
like I mentioned, I have an air purifier and I have a dehumidifier now. And that dehumidifier is picking up liters a day. And you think, where is that coming from? And if you weren't getting rid of it, it's trapped in your house. So we do live in, especially in this country, in a bit of a breeding ground. And I'd imagine more than not, more houses than not would have mold. Um, I sort of looked into this and realized that there's loads of different types, and there's almost correct me if I'm wrong. Is there's almost sort of like battles for space between the mold colonizing and setting off, off gassing and setting off, different, their mold spores to. It's almost like turf battles or turf war. And there's different types of mold that you can get in your home. Is that sort of something that you've like really looked into, and if so, what are the kind of worst types that you've noticed, and kind of how does that all work?
Yeah, so essentially, mold, it's just trying to survive. So it's not like looking to harm humans. And the mold toxins, which are the mycotoxin that the mold basically gives off, they're a secondary metabolite of the fungi, of the mother spore. And they only release these to stop other molds taking up their colony and winning their space, so winning their real estate. So what you said there is, very on point. And basically what I would say is the three really bad molds are Stachybotrys, Aspergillus, and Fusarium. And these are considered to be the black moles. Aspergillus is by far the most common one, and so is Stachybotrys. But I think there's hundreds of species of mold out there that can colonize and make you sick.
Wow. And you've got two threats there. I guess you've got the off gassing, and then you've got the mold spores.
Yeah, so the mycotoxins, they're kind of off-gassing the toxins that the mold releases. And then the mold spores, the actual spore, like the actual mother colony, doesn't actually do too much. That's not the toxic part.
Oh, really?
It's the mycotoxins that they give off.
So if you've killed the mold, because if you watch that, Moldy, the movie you mentioned, it can make you feel like if you've had mold, you need to kind of burn the house down and start again. It's in the carpets, it's in the clothes. If it's killed off and you've got a dehumidifier and it no longer presents that environment, I think you said before the call 45, was it 45%
25%
of humidity?
mold cannot grow in anything below 45% humidity.
So if it's not growing anymore and you've dropped the humidity of your home, would you still be worried about old mold spores from mold that you had years ago, or?
I mean, you can work to get an air filter, so an air cleaner, to begin to clean out all of the mycotoxins. I think that's a really good option for people who are highly sensitive. I think that works very well. And also, I mean, it depends. Dr. Shoemaker would say, yes, you need to clean everything, but I know people have not. I know people who have just kind of had the actual colony removed and then their belongings they've, put in the wash and it's been fine. But even in the Bible, in the book of Leviticus, they talk about mold and how if you find mold in your house, you have to leave and burn it down.
Oh my God, it's
There's
terrible.
many verses about mold in the Bible, about how it makes humans sick.
Wow, because that's what
Yeah.
we had that daunting conversation. Do we rip all the carpets up? Do we get, but it wasn't so bad. So we sort of stuck with it. And all those symptoms, like I said, did go. So that's positive. But then I look at my chest now and I'm thinking maybe, you know, maybe it didn't cure everything. I don't know. But it can be incredibly daunting, talking about throwing your clothes out and ripping up the carpets. And I don't know. I sometimes think the fear of these things can sometimes be as bad, if not worse, than the actual issue in hand. Because being stressed and worried and freaking out is never really going to kind of help anything, is it?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, you don't have to throw clothes out. You can put them in the wash and you can get very specific anti-mold washing detergent. And the same for the carpet. I mean, if you have someone come around and they clean all of the curtains and they clean all of the carpet and everything's been cleaned, then, there's no need to spend thousands ripping the carpet out or something.
Yeah. But I think if you had like, one of these houses with a big old basement and you've had like real water damage, then that's quite a different situation, isn't it? That's a real serious problem, I would say.
I would say it's just better to move and, have people who move in who aren't going to be sick to mold. If you have the HLA and you found out and you have a seriously moldy basement, then you just need to move.
Wow. Okay. With because I know that you can do a lot of tests in your home. You can test like, the dust and send that off to a lab and get that tested to see exactly what you have. But you can also test your body, right? What are the best sort of ways? What are the best tests for both parts there? So, firstly, your home and the environment, and secondly, your body. What would you do when it comes to one of your patients? What would be the test that you would run on them?
So the clinical standard is known as the ERMI test. So ERMI. And it's something like relative mold index test. So ERMI. And realistically, you need to have someone come to your home and they test all the different parts of your home. And they test for volatile organic compounds, they test for inflammagens, and they test for mycotoxins. And they give you a readout. And based on that readout, they can basically tell you if you're living in a mold infested home.
Wow. And then if it comes to the body, would you be doing like a urine test, or what's the kind of gold standard there?
So yeah, there's two different avenues. Well, there's many avenues that you can go down. So I'd probably say the easiest and the most accessible in terms of investment is to do a mycotoxin panel. Okay. And this panel is an at-home urine panel and it can be shipped internationally all over the world. If you want to take it up a level and you want to really get some good insights, for those of us in the EU and the UK, we're talking getting into the thousands of pounds, and then we're looking at gene transcriptomic testing and also the full SIRS panel. So the full SIRS panel along with the HLA gene. Fortunately, for people who live in the USA, the full SIRS panel is free. so totally free on their insurance with LabCorp, and they can get this panel done with their MD. And I'm always sending out the physician's order sheet. So when someone contacts me, the first thing I'll ask them to do if they live in the USA is go get the free panel done.
Wow. So we live in a country that has a quote unquote free socialist healthcare model, and it's going to cost you thousands because it's just not recognized by the NHS.
Exactly. Yeah, mold illness is not recognized by the NHS. I know 2 labs in the EU which do this panel, and yeah, you're talking about thousands. Not like 5,000 or something like that. The full search panel is 1,200, and the genie testing is even more. So yeah, you really have to pay for that one, unfortunately.
Are you better off working with someone like you and assuming that you have mold toxicity, or would you always recommend get a test so we know exactly what is going on in there?
So to qualify to work with me, I can't speak for other practitioners, but to qualify to work with me, I need to see a positive mycotoxin urine panel. Okay, so I don't need you to go and spend 1,200 on the SIRS panel unless you would like to. But as a necessarily, I need to see the mycotoxin panel, so the urine panel.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So I had a question. My mind's gone blank now.
It happens to me too.
I've got about 25,000 questions here. In terms of so I know you have a specific protocol and you have tweeted quite a lot about, you know, what you would do and how you're helping people. I'm just trying to think how we can kind of offer something to the listeners without you blowing their heads off with all the, you know, with all the science. What would be like your kind of first thing that you would do? Say someone doesn't have the money to book in with someone like yourself, but maybe they will in the future, but now they need some sort of quick relief. What would you say would be the kind of quicker fix and something to do that could maybe start the journey and give them like a sort of, you know, like a quicker sort of positive reaction?
So I would say they need to close their leaky gut and they need to close their blood-brain barrier. And one of the best ways to do this is stop the processed food, stop the gluten, stop the alcohol, and you can also use a peptide. It's an oral peptide called laroxatide. You can take that. It will definitely close those tight junctions of the blood-brain barrier and the gastrointestinal tract. It's very good. Then I would like them to start using thymosin alpha-1 peptide to calm down the autoimmunity, and also BP157 peptide.
So would these sort of promote the body's natural kind of detox process? So it will just get things moving, the body will calm down a little bit and stop sort of overreacting to, you know, I guess the attack it's under.
I wouldn't necessarily say that laroxatide and TA1 and BPC are for detoxification. They're more to stop the inflammation moving around. So it's going to get a halt on everything. Because if you do want to detoxify mold, you need a prescription. So it does require a prescription. So you do have to work with someone. So it's something that not a lot of people are going to be able to achieve solo. And everyone in the mold community will tell you the same thing.
Yeah. So I know, you know, what often happens with any type of toxin in the body, it obviously goes back through the liver, ends up trying to escape through the GI tract. But if you've got leaky gut and you're not regularly going to the toilet or binding, it can find its way, you know, if the gut's porous, it can find its way back into the blood, right? And then it's just doing that whole cycle again. So if you fix the gut, I would imagine that there's like a level of protection there, right? So it's not continuously going back in the blood and recycling.
Yeah, exactly. So when you close those tight junctions, yeah, you can better excrete the toxins, and it just stops the whole inflammatory process.
Yeah. And if you don't do that, but you start using something that's going to actually start detoxing you, like some sort of chelator or something like that, I would imagine you could wreak havoc on yourself.
Yeah, so, regarding the Dr. Shoemaker protocol, it's really good, and I take my hat off to him. But basically, the second step is to start using cholestyramine, which is the binder. And from experience, if you immediately just put someone on cholestyramine and you haven't healed the inflammation, you haven't looked at the gut, they can get constipated, it can make the leaky gut even worse, they can have an exacerbation of symptoms. So it's really important to look at this systematically and to time things correctly. Nothing is done on accident. Everything is done with a purpose.
Yeah. And with the gut, I mean, how quickly can you heal a leaky gut? I've heard all different time frames, a couple of weeks eating well. Natasha McBride, the GAPS diet, she says, it can happen relatively quickly, but you need to stay on the protocol for a long period of time because, you can almost undo the work. What have you seen when it comes to sort of the time frame?
If I'm gonna speak realistically to everyone listening, you're looking at 2 to 3 months, like realistically, to heal the gut.
Yeah, and we're talking as tight a diet as you can, like you say, no alcohol,
Yeah, of
cutting things like
course.
coffee out as well.
So for some people, coffee is an irritant. I would say if you have mold illness and leaky gut, you should not be consuming an exorbitant amount of coffee. But look, if you're trying to heal your gut, the moment you have gluten, the moment you have a beer, the moment you have wine or processed food, you're going to cause a rise in zonulin and you're going to cause intestinal permeability all over again. Even myself, if I even cheat the tiniest bit with gluten, I just feel awful after. And I'm a very healthy individual.
Yeah. Do you what sort of diet are you focusing on? Is it sort of more a keto-y type of diet, like higher fats and meats and things like this, or?
So I have done carnivore. So I did carnivore for around 3 months and I really enjoyed it, but it's not something you can sustain long term. I haven't really done keto. I would say my diet is whole foods. So if it grows in the ground and if it was born, then I will eat it. I tend to stay away from dairy. It doesn't really work too well on me. It's quite inflammatory for my body. I don't eat gluten. I don't smoke. I don't take any drugs, no alcohol. I'm, completely teetotal. But I'm not afraid of fruit and I'm not afraid of sugar. So I actually love orange juice and it's so good for my metabolism.
Yeah. Yeah, I was carnivore for nearly 3 years, by the way.
Oh wow. It's quite damaging to the thyroid,
Yeah,
actually.
well,
And
yeah.
you need to go on like a refeeding after carnivore because have you looked into Ray Peat? It's kind of
Yeah,
his work.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, I've there's so much information around Ray Pete. I follow quite a lot of people on Twitter who,
The Pitas.
yeah, it's a big old community, isn't it?
He's
um,
got really good work. I haven't looked into it in depth, but from probably third hand knowledge from my Twitter feed, yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me.
yeah, I mean, people who have high inflammatory markers do quite well on carnivore. Obviously, how long you can do it is an individual thing, but I did know that it didn't do my thyroid any favors. My my endocrine system, stress and hormones and all of this, I was just all over the place, and anxiety, and yeah, all of that sort of come towards the period that I mentioned, when I started to really get symptoms, and that's when I started to look at my diet, and I've added whole food carbs. We eat quite a lot of potatoes, generally kind of with a lot of fat and vegetables and loads of meat, still predominantly meat, but that's helped a lot. But I think there's so many different types of diet, and a lot of these, like vegan diets and things like this, I feel like they can actually cause a lot of issues to people's guts, with things like lectins and phytates. I'm not afraid of a lectin, but you don't want to be eating it 4 times a day, and everything you eat's got gluten in, and I'd imagine that would cause all sorts of problems as well over longer periods of time.
Yeah, I stay away from veganism and carnivore. It's become very political,
Yeah.
and this is not something that I want to be involved in.
Yeah. When I started to look at the kind of mold stuff, and I went right down the mercury thing as well, and it's very similar in the sense of how it kind of works in the body, and because the body will store these things for almost to protect you, right? Stores it in the fatty tissues, the cells, the central nervous system, and this is why a lot of these toxins and mycotoxins can cause all sorts of symptoms, because your body's very individual, and it can sort of lead to different symptoms. And when I started to learn about all of this stuff, I went away from worrying about what people eat and the diet argument, because it starts to become an individual thing, and you're more focused on yourself now rather than what everyone else is eating, and getting into these tribal wars and, like you say, politics. Yeah, when you realize there's more going on, it becomes a bit of a waste of time, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, I mean, you have to figure out what works for you. And yeah, I'm not interested in like diet wars and things like that. I think it's a waste of time. Even if I get negative comments on my Twitter, I just block, I don't want to reply. I'm not there for that. I'm there to like help others and to serve others.
Yeah.
And me arguing with someone about this and that, it just serves the ego. Like I don't need to be right to some like random anonymous account on Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on things like saunas and
I love the sauna.
yeah, do you feel it helps with your protocol, or?
Oh, definitely, definitely, definitely. Yeah. Results are sped up miraculously when someone is using the sauna 3 to 4 times a week. For anything, for heavy metal detoxification, for phthalate detoxification, for any of these hormone disrupting chemicals, even for the gut for longevity. The sauna is a big yes.
Yeah. What about if people are using the sauna but they're not following your protocol? Do you think that there'll be results there, just sort of, independent of, anything else?
Of course, I mean, if someone has mold and, they're not in the right mindset, or they just don't want to work with a practitioner, which is fine, then yeah, they should probably invest in either a sauna membership, or they can buy one of those sauna tents. Those are really good as well. They're good if you can't get yourself to a proper Russian sauna or something.
Here's a question for you. What about a moldy sauna? Because I know a moldy sauna. I went in there and I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I have not. I can see how mold can grow in a sauna. Like if they turn it off at night, it's kind of the perfect environment for mold to grow in. But I don't necessarily. I haven't seen that, and I don't know if mold could survive the heat. So maybe it's kind of growing and dying and growing and dying. I'm not too sure there. I'm not sure how many, degrees Celsius they can survive in.
Ah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I know of a sauna and I went in there, and yeah, uh, unless it's just old and the heat has created what looks like mold, possibly. But I was thinking
Maybe.
that. I was thinking, I'm coming here, to detox, and I was just thinking, imagine if it was mold. I mean, I couldn't ask anyone, I couldn't test it, but it looked like it. I was just thinking, how unproductive would that one be? But
Yeah, moldy sauna would not be good.
the other thing as well, which a lot of people talk about when it comes to sort of detoxifying, and again, it could be heavy metals and mold as well, is like lymph drainage. So sort of getting you know, rebounding and getting your lymphs moving. Is that something that you'd also promote as well?
I think lymphatic drainage is really important. It's not an area of expertise of mine. It's something that's been on my list to look into. But yeah, on the whole, I think lymphatic drainage is really important. I know that there's some really nice supplements out there that help with lymphatic drainage. And I think exercise, so exercise is one of the main ways that humans can actually, drain their lymph. And you can also get some body gua sha tools as well. Um, and yeah, I think even putting your legs above your head on the wall, I even think that can drain your lymph.
Yeah. So just getting, because I think the issue comes where things become stagnated, and then, you know, that's what caused mold in the house in the first place, is not enough airflow and, you know, a damp, stagnated, you know, area. And I'd imagine it sort of extends to everything, including the body. So getting yourself moving and sweating and breathing heavily, I think that these things will have a, you know, major impact. I'd like to see. I mean, I don't know if there would be any sort of data to quantify this, but you know, like during the lockdowns where people were sort of in and sat around and scared to go out and open the windows. You know, I'd imagine that there was a lot of kind of, you know, manifestation of different health problems, because you need to be out and breathing fresh air and getting out there and getting away from, you know, your house with the Wi-Fi on all the time. And yeah, I'd imagine that that didn't do us any favors for that period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm anti-vax, so I'm not vaccinated and I didn't take the vaccine. And
Yeah,
then when it came to COVID, I wasn't really all that interested, to say the very least.
yeah,
So from personal experience, it was it was a weird time in my life and for the world, but I wasn't really freaked out. I just kind of continued like normal. I was even traveling like normal.
yeah.
Um, and then, but yeah, on your point, I can definitely understand how and why it impacted the lives of so many. And I wouldn't make a derogatory statement and say, it didn't impact the lives of other people.
Yeah, no, totally. Um, I was going to ask the sort of last point, just to kind of wrap things up. I was going to ask if you've got any sort of specific case studies, or examples of people that had, you know, issues and then realized it was mold, and then, you know, you've fixed them up with your protocol, and just any examples. You did obviously mention a really kind of negative, um, you know, encounter that you had where somebody unfortunately passed. Um, is there any that you could sort of go into that, you know, maybe the ones that stand out the most to you, and, you know, I guess to kind of leave people with a bit of a positive that, you know, you might have had this issue for a long time, but we can help you, and here's some examples of how it can, you know, you can almost claim your health and your life back.
Yeah, so I actually have all of my, well, not all. I have 5 really good case studies on my website, and they're super detailed for everyone to read. And then I do have other case studies of people that I've worked with, but I'd say the main ones are on my website, and I'll be updating those soon with my most recent case studies.
Yeah, perfect. Excellent. So just sort of wrapping things up, unless there's anything else you wanted to sort of go into while I've got you on here.
I think this has been great.
Yeah, perfect. So where can people find you, and, you know, what are you up to over the next year? Because I know you do a lot of conferences and guest speaking at different events. So how's the next year looking for you?
So I'm going to be in Dubai from January until April, and then I think maybe the USA. But all of the conferences I go to, I'll post on my Twitter, my Instagram, and people can find me on my website. So I guess that'll be in the show notes, right?
Yeah, I'll share all of those links. Yeah, perfect. Well, look, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Okay,
Hope
perfect.